Today we're digging into one of the most profound and frankly uncomfortable contradictions in all of Western thought. And it all comes from a single ancient book, Deuteronomy. On the one hand, you got some of the most forward-thinking ethical laws of the ancient world. But on the other, you have some of the most chilling commands you can imagine.
And yet, this is the command that's at the absolute heart of it all. I mean, let's be clear, there's no wiggle room there. It's a direct, unambiguous order for total annihilation. It's brutal, it's absolute, and it's completely at odds with so much of the text's own ethical framework.
So you just have to ask, what is going on here? How can one of the foundational texts from multiple world religions talk about a future of world peace and in the same breath mandate the complete extermination of an entire people? It's a question that has, believe it or not, echoed for thousands of years, and it shaped everything from peaceful missionary work to the most brutal modern military doctrines.
All right, so to really get a handle on this, we have to start with one side of the coin. We need to appreciate the incredible vision of peace that Deuteronomy and the traditions around it were actually trying to build. And this isn't just some small side note. It's the ideological core. It's the whole point.
So, this is the thesis. The big idea is that there's one God, an ethical God, and that the entire arc of human history is bending towards a future of universal peace. Now you have to understand, this was a huge deal back then, a totally revolutionary idea, especially when you compare it to the worldviews of the surrounding cultures, which were often pretty amoral and saw history as just one big repeating cycle. This vision gives rise to a very specific way of dealing with the world.
And a perfect example of this in action? The story of Jonah. I mean, this is the classic model for the missionary path. The goal here isn't to destroy, it's to convert. Jonah gets sent to this foreign, supposedly sinful city, not with an army, but with a message. He's supposed to engage in dialogue, and what happens? The people listen, they repent, and they're shown mercy. That's the ideal, right? Peace through teaching, not through force.
But, and this is a huge but, as we already know, that is not the only path the text offers. Now we have to turn to the complete opposite, the antithesis, and it is a jarring shift, a mandate that's rooted not in teaching, but in total, all-out war.
Okay, so let's just put them right next to each other, because the contrast is, well, it's everything. On one side, you have the path of Jonah, affectionate dialogue, teaching, conversion. On the other, you have the path of the Amalekites, extirpate, annihilate, literally blot out their name from memory. This isn't just a subtle difference, it's a fundamental, head-on contradiction. So why? Why the two completely different approaches? The text actually gives a very specific reason.
The justification all comes down to this idea of irrational hate. The thinking is that this isn't just any enemy. The Amalekites are framed as embodying a unique kind of evil, a malice that isn't strategic, that isn't about resources or self-preservation. It's a pure, baseless desire to hurt the vulnerable just for the sake of it. And by its very definition, it's an evil that you just can't reason with.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. Let's compare two of Israel's great enemies. You've got the Egyptians. They enslaved the Israelites for generations, a truly terrible act. And yet the command is, do not hate an Egyptian. Why? Well, because their motivation, according to the text, was a kind of rational fear. They were afraid of this large, powerful group living inside their borders. But the Amalekites, they were different. They didn't attack the strong. They specifically attacked the weak and the weary, the people lagging behind. Their motivation is presented as nothing but pure, irrational hate. And for that, the command isn't forgiveness, it's annihilation.
And you know what? This ancient distinction, this idea of separating a rational enemy from an irrational one, it creates a dilemma that has never, ever gone away. It forces every generation to try and find a synthesis, to struggle with how to reconcile the dream of peace with the nightmare of an evil that just won't negotiate.
And that brings this whole ancient problem crashing into our world. It really boils down to this. What do you do with a bully who simply can't be reasoned with? I mean, the 20th century gave us the ultimate horrifying test case, Hitler. You had Neville Chamberlain, who tried the path of negotiation, of dialogue, seeking peace in our time. But he was dealing with an irrational hate, and his attempts at peace, well, they were seen as weakness, and they failed catastrophically. At some point, you have to ask the hard question, must force be met with force?
So people have been wrestling with this exact tension for centuries. And one of the biggest, most influential outcomes is something called the just war doctrine. This is basically one of history's most serious attempts to thread that needle, to synthesize the ideal of peace with the grim reality of conflict. It's not a blank check for war. It's actually a super strict ethical checklist to figure out, 1, when it's okay to go to war, and 2, just as important, how you have to behave once the fighting starts.
Now, this whole idea of just war didn't just pop out of nowhere.
If you look at the history of warfare, you see this really interesting evolution. The ancient Greeks, they often treated war almost like a regulated sport. They had a fighting season, clear rules, big decisive battles. Then, the just war doctrine in the Middle Ages tried to add a layer of ethics on top of that. But then, something snaps. During the U.S. Civil War, with things like Sherman's March to the Sea, we see the dawn of total war. And that changes absolutely everything.
So what is total war? Well, in short, it's throwing the rule book out the window. The goal isn't just to beat the other army anymore. It's to break the enemy's entire society, their whole will to fight. And that means suddenly civilians are targets, factories are targets, the old rules are gone. You get these chilling historical lines, like from the crusade against the Cathars. Kill them all and let God sort them out. Winning becomes the only morality.
And that brings us right up to the modern era and the challenge of what we call asymmetrical warfare. So what happens when you, operating under a set of rules like the just war doctrine, have to fight an enemy who is fighting a total war or has no rules at all? This is the central nightmare for so many modern strategists and ethicists. It is the Deuteronomy Dilemma, just played out on a global scale. Do you stick to your rules, even when your enemy is using those very rules against you?
So, after all this, you might be hoping for a neat and tidy answer from this thousands-year-old text. Well, you're not going to get one. What it gives us instead is an essential and eternally unresolved human question.
But that doesn't mean people have stopped trying to find a way through. One really powerful idea that's come up is aggressive peacemaking. This is not about just sitting back and hoping for the best. The idea is that peace has to be waged, actively and sometimes radically. Think about the Buddhist monks who set themselves on fire to protest the Vietnam War. That was a profoundly aggressive, shocking act designed to wage a kind of war against war itself.
And what's really wild is that you can see this exact tension inside the Book of Deuteronomy itself. While it commands total annihilation for the outsider, for the Amalekite, it sets a hard limit on punishment for an insider. No more than 40 lashes, so that your brother isn't degraded in your eyes. The goal was always restoration, not annihilation. It shows this deep conflict between how you treat someone inside your community versus that external, irrational enemy.
And just to make things even more complicated, you can't just write this off as an Old Testament problem. I mean, Jesus himself, the central figure of pacifist thought for many, is quoted as saying this. Now, scholars argue about what sword means here. Is it a metaphor? But the line itself resists any easy explanation. It suggests that the path to ultimate peace might actually run right through the middle of conflict.
And so we end up right back where we started, with the dilemma. And this isn't just some ancient theological puzzle. It's a live question for all of us right now. When you are confronted by an actor, a person, an ideology, a nation that is operating from a place of pure irrational hate, do you hold fast to the rules of engagement that they so clearly despise? Or does their refusal to play by the rules mean that you have to abandon them too? Deuteronomy laid out the terrifying stakes of that choice thousands of years ago, and we are all still searching for the answer.